Hello everybody, and welcome back to Think Outside the Board. This is the June Game of the Month video. Now, it's landing in August because I've gotten a little behind on producing these, and in order to catch up, that means there will be more frequent Game of the Month videos than normal. So in another 2 weeks or so, I'll be publishing the July Game of the Month video, and then about 2 weeks after that, I'll be publishing the August Game of the Month video, and then I think we should be caught up in early September. If you're new to the channel, please consider liking and subscribing. And other than that, let's just get on with the video, shall we? So the Game of the Month is obviously Kanban EV. I like to have the Game of the Month sitting up here so that it's casting its shadow over the proceedings of the entire video. The last video I actually showed what all the games were that were my games of the month, my other games of the month, because I have several categories. However, I like keeping them a little bit more mysterious and then revealing them to you. So if you're really curious, you can go down and look in the comments. I'll have them linked. But if you want to sort of find out as I go through them, then don't look, and there'll be surprises because I'm not going to put them all in the thumbnail like I did last month. So when I'm doing these videos, I have 3 different categories. I have the main Game of the Month, which in order to qualify, it has to be published within the last 6 months. Kanban EV is just going to squeak in there because I played it in June, right? This is the June Game of the Month video. And this was published, or I received the Kickstarter in January. So it was within that 6-month window when it was played. I'll also talk about some games that are outside of the 6-month window. And my reason for doing that is I like to showcase games that are a little bit older, that maybe don't have the same heat, that are perhaps off the hot list at Board Game Geek, but they're still really good games and I'm still playing them, and so I think it merits communicating what those games are. And then finally, in its kind of own category, are games that are kind of reprints or later editions. I know some people don't like to class those with new games, so I put those in their own category. This video, I will have 1 game for the Game of the Month. I will have a Game of the Month and a runner-up for the games that are outside of that 6-month window. And then I'm going to have 1 game for the later edition. So there'll be a total of 4 games in this video. And we are going to start with the runner-up for games that are older than 6 months. And the first game up is Merv, The Heart of the Silk Road. This was published in November 2020. So when I played it in June, it was more than 6 months. And it is currently the number 8 game on my 2020 list. Now, I'm going to be doing a top 25 of 2020 in the next few months. I'm sort of late to the game in that, but I'm trying to make sure that I play through everything that I might want to include, or most everything. I think there are going to be a few outliers, like the latest Pandemic Legacy. But I'm trying to get through almost everything so that my list will be as complete as possible. And not to spoil anything, but things could move around. You never know. But right now, this is at 8 on my 2020 list. And I really enjoyed it. I think I rated it an 8.5. It is just a really, really good medium-heavy Euro with lots of things that you can do. The reason that it's a little further down my list, it's only at 8, and it's not the number 1 pick, this is the runner-up, is that while I really like all of the mechanics, and I want to play this a bunch more, I think there is a lot of really good room in this game to kind of choose your strategy. There are different things that you can do all over the board. So you could play one game and decide to focus on 1 or 2 things, and another game and focus on a different set of things. In the middle of the board, players will be building a little city. And whenever they build a building, they will be able to take the action that corresponds to the building type of that tile. And they're going to be going around this series of buildings, building up the city of Merv and trying to create walls and gates to protect that city from Mongol invasions. So that's a constant. But then within that, there are all these different building types. I think there's 7 of them. And there are different mechanics for each building type. So you really can try to focus on 1 or 2 of those building types and exploit those mechanics as much as possible. And I think there's really a lot of great mechanics, a lot of great overlap, a lot of room for exploring different strategies. Now, the reason it's not higher is that it's not very tied to theme. And the graphic design is a little busy. So I think on your first play or two, your eyes may cross a little bit staring at the board. And it just doesn't have those kind of thematic elements that keep reaffirming the mechanics. The mechanics are lovely, they're great, and the board is colorful and everything looks fantastic, but there just isn't that integration to kind of bring everything together and take this game to the next level. However, it's still a great game. I rated it an 8.5, and it is a game that I want to play again and again. So this comes with my full recommendation, but just know that when we get into talking about that level of game, it doesn't quite have those connections the way that this one does. Kanban EV has an amazing level of crossover between thematics and mechanics. Merv just doesn't quite do that. It's not quite there. But it is a really good game. And once you can kind of get past that and just accept it for what it is, it's a really, really good Euro. There's just so much going on, lots of bright colors, lots of attractiveness in the board and the layout, and tons of cool mechanics kind of play off each other. So I really like Merv. It's a fantastic game. I'd recommend it to anyone, particularly people who like heavier Euros. I think you might want to hold back on this one if you're not a fan of Euros, or if having those Euros where the theme doesn't really connect is a big turnoff for you. But for other people, for people who like, medium heavy to heavy games like Euros, don't need to have thematics dripping from it, it's a great game. It's a really, really good game, and you should check it out. Okay, so what game beat this out? And this is going to be a weird pick to beat out this game because they're kind of different, very different games. It's actually a much smaller game that beat this one out. So also published in November 2020 and currently at number 5 on my best of 2020 list is this smaller box game, Curious Cargo. Now, Curious Cargo is designed by Ryan Courtney, who did Pipeline, which I really loved. And that game was a Euro game, an economic game, and it had this very complicated tile placement mini game kind of going on where you're building a pipe network. Curious Cargo has a very similar tile placement game going on. However, there's not really the economic game going on. There's not the Euro element game. It's just purely a polyomino puzzle that you're constructing. Well, not just, because that's half the game. The other half the game is a pick up and deliver game where you're pushing out trucks either on your export lane or your opponent's export lane to try to ship out the goods that your tile network is producing. And there's just such a good interplay between those two elements, between the tile construction and this pipe network construction and then the shipping out of the goods. On top of that, there's just a very curious theme on this one, which is that, well, first of all, it's a 2-player game, so it's head-to-head, whereas Pipeline was a 2 to 4 player game, so more of a Euro and multiplayer. This is just 2-player, head-to-head. And you are going to have these player mats that you're using. And they have multiple setup mats on here. I think there are 10 different mats and they're double-sided. So there is a lot of variability in how you set up this game. There are also 2 different versions of the game. One game uses 2 resources and the more advanced game uses 3 resources. Now, there are pipe colors that correspond to those resources, which means if you're playing the basic game, the one with 2 resources, you're going to be using one side of those tiles. If you're using the 3 resource game, which also includes a purple resource, you're going to be using the back side of the tiles, and that will include 3 different colors of pipes. So the designer, and if you go on Board Game Geek, it's usually recommended that you don't play the advanced game until you're proficient at the basic game. However, I found that with the advanced tiles, there are a lot more straight tiles, a lot less tiles with kind of extreme curvature. So at least for me, I felt like there was some counterbalance there, and the advanced game didn't seem that much worse to me because the tile situation was made a little bit easier. However, I think the general consensus is still that you probably want to play the basic game a few times before you graduate yourself to the advanced game. So the theme, though, also has this very interesting kind of weird element where the items that you're shipping out are these bio-organic, somewhat conscious materials. And there's also a weird element to the theme where you and the person that you're playing against are both producing the same goods, and you're shipping it out, and you're both trying to sabotage each other's exporting. So in the end, there's not really that many goods that are actually going out into the world. You're generally just grabbing the other person's goods that they're trying to export, if you're successful. I like this game better than Merv because while I love heavy Euros, and Merv has so many good mechanics and so much good interplay between those mechanics and so many choices that you can make in terms of strategy. Again, keeping in mind that the theme in Merv is a little bit weak, so that element is lacking. Curious Cargo is just one compelling choice after another, and I really like the tight puzzle play of this. Now, I would completely recommend this game to anybody who wanted a next step after something like Patchwork. I think those are both two-player games. They're both polyomino tile placement games. This is definitely a lot heavier. So I don't know what Patchwork is. Let's call it medium light. I think this game, if you look at the Board Game Geek ratings, actually falls under heavy, just pure heavy game. And I mean, that's going to depend on the player, as all ratings do. But this one has a very tight spatial polyomino game going on. And for some people, that's just going to completely freeze and fry their brain. And it's one of the most complex puzzles in polyomino games I think that I've ever played. So one of my favorite polyomino games is the Isle of Cats. I just think it's fantastic. And I like Patchwork. I also own Cottage Garden. I have a friend who completely prefers Cottage Garden, but I like Patchwork so much, and I think Patchwork is really good at a two-player count. However, it can't play more, so I have Cottage Garden, so if I want to play a similar polyomino game with 3 to 4 players, we can do that. But I have also now got Isle of Cats, which to me is the superior game, and that can play up to 6 players. So I don't know if I'll eventually get rid of Cottage Garden, but I think my fiance Kristen likes it a lot, so perhaps not. But those are some of the polyomino games that I personally really like. Curious Cargo, I think, is still my favorite, just because it's so chunky and crunchy, and the decisions are so compelling. And not only are you dealing with the construction of that pipe network, there are also really, really good decisions to be made about these trucks and how you're shipping out your goods. So in every game, you're going to have 2 different phases that you're going back and forth. You'll have the construction phase where you're building up that pipe network, and then you'll have the shipping phase where you're shipping out these truck tiles. And the idea here is that you want to put truck tiles out that will align with your export lanes of your pipe network. And then eventually they'll get pushed through and they'll go by your opponent's factory. And if they have pipes lined up that can suck those goods off of your ships as the correct little tiles line up with the right spaces, they may steal those goods. And you're trying to do the same thing. You're trying to build an import pipe network to steal the goods off their truck tiles as those trucks go by your factory. I think both parts of the game are just really compelling and really well designed, and there's a nice interplay between them too. So for me, I could just sit down and play this game over and over all day long, and I'm just going to have great decisions the whole time. I don't know that I want to actually play it all day long, but I could, and I think I really would be challenged and entertained the whole time. And that's saying a lot for sort of a small box 2-player polyomino game. So this one comes with a high recommendation for me. As I said, this one was also published in November 2020, so it didn't quite make the new game list. And it is currently at number 5 on my best of 2020 list. Again, though, the people who may not enjoy this game as much are going to be the people who, for whatever reason, either just don't like polyomino games, or if when those polyomino games get fairly crunchy and complex, it just is headache-inducing or it makes their AP lock up. So this game may not be for those players, but for other people who like crunchy games, who like polyominoes, who are looking for a polyomino game that is at a complexity level beyond what is mostly out there, this is your game and you should try it out because it's amazing. Okay. Now, moving on to the game in the category of games that were previously published with other versions. We're going to have this guy comes out, and he's the only one in here this month, so this is automatically just the winner. And I've got a couple little boxes for this. I'm not going to bring out the player mat, which I already do have, but this is the new version of Kemet, Kemet Blood and Sand. Now, I do have a first impressions video out already for Curious Cargo. I also have one out for Merv. Kemet is coming very soon. So is Kanban. Kanban is actually already filmed, and I think I'm probably going to publish this video first, but within probably 24 hours after that, you'll see this one launch. Kemet may take another week or so. I still have to film it, I still have to edit it, but it's coming. There will be a first impressions video for this one eventually, but there are already first impressions videos for Curious Cargo and Merv, and there will be for Kanban within about 24 hours of this video publishing. So just to let you know what else is out there if you want to see more content on these things from me or a more in-depth video of my feelings about these games. The Game of the Month video is just designed to be a little bit more off the cuff, me talking about these games after the fact, more extemporaneously. So, Kemet. I don't really have too many dudes on maps games. I have Scythe, which I like. I'm not sure that really qualifies though. That kind of has other things going on. I really liked Rising Sun when that came out, but I didn't back it, and I knew from playing it instantly that it really excelled at a higher player count, like 5, 6, actually 4 or 6. I don't really like Rising Sun with an odd number of player counts because I think it kind of affects the alliances that you can form. So I really liked Rising Sun, but I didn't back it, and after the fact I thought, should I try to acquire this? There's just so many boxes, and I'm sort of a completist, so I knew if I went to get Rising Sun, I would want to get everything, and it was just more than I wanted to pay for a game that I'm not going to play that often, maybe once or twice a year, because I think it's hard to get a good group, even pre-pandemic, of 4 to 6 players to commit to something like Rising Sun for several hours. It's a big game, there's a lot of pieces, and it really needs that higher player count. And it's got a big expensive price tag, so I never even thought about acquiring Rising Sun. I just thought, well, it's something that I'm going to continue to enjoy playing a couple times a year with friends who have the game. And I don't have an extensive history with Dudes on a Map games. I've played Tyrants of the Underdark, but that's more of a deck builder. I know there are some classics in the genre, like Kemet, like Innis, and like Cyclades, but I haven't played any of those games until I backed this. So when this came on Kickstarter, it seemed like a great time for me to sort of get my feet wet in the Dudes on a Map genre, and I like the Egyptian theme of Kemet. I think it's pretty cool. I'd heard great things about it, so it was time for me to back this. Now, I still have not played Cyclades and Innis, and there are some other good Dudes on a Map games out there. I've played Clash of Cultures, which I don't love. All of this is kind of a prelude to say I like Kemet Blood and Sand, but I don't love it. I think my rating for this one is about a 7.5. I'm unsure, but when the first impressions video hits, I'll tell you my score at that point. I do know it. I have it written down. I've forgotten what it is, but I think it's about a 7.5. And here is why. And to me, the good and the bad in Kemet are kind of intertwined. So I think with the new version, there's a great playmat. I really love it. It's huge. It's like 110% side of the board. If you can get it, I would very much recommend playing on it. And I think the reason is with a game like this, a big kind of Dudes on a Map, miniature skirmish game, you really kind of want that theme and you want that immersion. So the more things that you can have to kind of bling it out are great. The map is great. The first time I played with this, I actually played with a friend's copy, and he'd painted all of the miniatures, at least the ones that we were using, and they looked fantastic. And you'll probably be seeing some of those photos scrolling through as I talk about this. My copy, I haven't painted. I don't intend to paint it. Just I don't have time to take on a whole other hobby in addition to playing games and making videos about them. So my copy will probably remain unpainted. Not a huge deal. A little less bling though. It's really great playing with the miniatures when they are painted. And I am looking forward to playing with the Book of the Dead stuff and some of the little alternative modules and things. And I do have all of the fifth tiles, all of the green tiles, which depending on how you backed, you might get a few of them, but you had to back at a higher level to kind of get all of the green tiles. This is a game about tiles. And that's kind of some of the negative of the game, I think. It's also a game where you're not really doing that much on the board. You're moving people around, you're attacking, you're defending. It's a big fighting game. It's a skirmish game. And that part of the game is kind of bare bones, basic. It works well. It's not dissimilar from other games in the genre. What sets Kemet Blood and Sand apart, though, is those tiles. So one of the things that you're going to be doing on your little player mats with your actions is that you can build up your pyramids, and the more you build them up, the higher level tiles you can buy of matching colors. And those tiles are what really makes Kemet different and gives it its variability, because as you buy these tiles, you are making the variability of your faction increasingly asymmetric. Sometimes those tiles might just be a victory point. Boom, you've bought a victory point. Sometimes you're buying monsters that you're going to take out into combat, and the monsters have different abilities. Sometimes you're doing things that will improve your economic engine. Sometimes you're doing things that will boost your defense or your offense. But that is where the strength of the game is, and that's where the fun of the game is, along with how those tiles kind of convey the theme, the Egyptian theme. And all that stuff is wonderful. But the first couple times you play this game, you're not going to really know those tiles very well. And there are player guides that come that are several pages long, so you can kind of look through and see these tiles as you're playing the game and plan out what you may want to buy. But you're flying a little bit blind. And I think it's going to take a game or two for most players to kind of have more of an understanding of what tiles there are and how they might be able to play those as part of a strategy. So I think this game really does favor experienced players that have more experience with this, players that know what those tiles are and have some idea going into the game what they might want to buy and how they might kind of want to string them together. So for me, that's a little bit of a bump to the game. Just knowing that if I'm playing it and introducing it to new players, the new players are going to always be at a little bit of a disadvantage. And I mean, they may be holding their heads a little bit, trying to take in all the information on all these tiles. So, a little bit of a negative for me. It's still my game of the month in terms of a reprint or, a later version of a game. I don't want to say reprint because if a game goes back to a second printing, nothing else is new. I'm not necessarily including games like that in these, because games go for second, third, fourth printings all the time. They just need to print new printings when they've sold out. But for something like this, where they've actually gone back and redesigned it and put out a new version, that's what this category is for. So if I didn't like this game, I just wouldn't have a game in this category at all this month. And I've done that before. So although I'm making some criticisms of this game, just know that I still do like it. The future for it in my collection, though, is uncertain. I know I'll be keeping it around for a time, because right now this is one of few games that I own like this, and it's going to be the game that I bring out when I want to play Dudes on a Map games right now and introduce it to new players. However, I still do want to go check out Cyclades and Innis and some other games like that. I also have Game of Thrones, the board game. I think that will probably get the boot, because I do like Kemet more than Game of Thrones, the board game. Although they do some different things, and I like the Game of Thrones IP, and I hear Game of Thrones, the board game is even better if you get the Mother of Dragons expansion and you can play that. I definitely prefer Kemet over Game of Thrones, the board game, though. So if I have to get rid of one of those two games, Game of Thrones, the board game is gone. I just don't know, because I like this game but don't love it. I don't know if it will eventually get replaced by something like Innis or Cyclades if I feel that those games are better once I eventually play them. But there is a lot of good about this. You're probably seeing, the pictures of the board, the mat, and the minis. There's a lot of attractive stuff going on in this game. And I think especially if you have a game group that plays together semi-regularly so that people get familiar with Kemet, this is going to be a game that you can pull out, once a month, however often you want to play it. And if everyone's kind of at a similar knowledge level of Kemet, the games are always going to be balanced and a hell of a lot of fun. So, yeah, I think for game groups like that, you shouldn't be wary of it. Just know, though, I think if you're always going to be playing it with new players, there is this large knowledge base regarding the tiles that I think needs a couple games for players to really, take in all of that information and be able to execute it very well. But it's fun. It's got this great Egyptian theme. It's awesome moving around these armies on the map, and the monsters in the game are a lot of fun. They look really cool. You've got scarabs, you've got mummies, all kinds of beasts and stuff. It's a lot of fun. So this is the game of the month for games that have previous versions in their history. Finally, let's talk about Kanban EV. So this game being my game of the month is probably not a big surprise to anybody who knows me, because Vital Lacerda is pretty much my favorite designer. At the very least, I think he's my favorite solo designer, meaning designers who work by themselves. I also really, really like the Mind Clash team of Richard Amon and Victor Peter, but they always work together. So at least in terms of designers who generally work by themselves, Vital Lacerda is my favorite designer. I also have to say that Kanban EV, I don't think it's displaced Lisboa as my favorite game of his, but it's either in the number 2 or number 3 spot. I haven't decided where it sits with On Mars. So this is either 2 or 3, and On Mars is either 2 or 3. And I need to play On Mars again soon, I think, so that I can figure out that distinction. I will say, however, that Kanban EV, and you'll see this if you watch my first impressions video coming very soon, I am giving this game a 10 out of 10. I love it. I think it's amazing. It is also currently number 2 on my best of 2021 list. Oh, and by the way, if you're curious, Kemet is number 12, but this is number 2. What's ahead of this? Sleeping Gods. And that's a little bit, I mean, you kind of can't compare these two games. I think Sleeping Gods for me got the edge because it is this narrative game with this huge campaign, and it's super compelling, and it's not even one campaign, it's multiple campaigns. It feels like a video game where you're going to go out and play it several times in order to really kind of get all the achievements unlocked and do everything in that game. So Sleeping Gods is number 1 right now, but Kanban EV is number 2. It's also my favorite Euro so far this year. Next up would be Excavation Earth, which is really good, by David Turksey. But Kanban EV, number 2, 10 out of 10. Amazing design by Vital Lacerda. Amazing artwork by Ian O'Toole, who also coincidentally did Merv, The Heart of the Silk Road. But this is just amazing artwork and theme in this. Now, in Kanban EV, you are a worker in an auto plant, and you spend the game working in 5 different departments. There's also a boss named Sandra who's constantly evaluating 5 different departments. So the game is simple on the surface because it's a worker placement game. There's only 5 different places you can go. You can go to the design department and pick up physical designs that later you will take to R&D to either turn into cars, that you'll use these designs to purchase cars, or you'll use them to upgrade the designs and score more points at the end of the game for upgraded designs. You can go to logistics, where you'll get car parts, and you can use those car parts to upgrade designs later in R&D. You can also use those car parts in assembly to help you make cars. Of course, you can go to assembly, where you make cars and you'll push cars out off the line, and those cars will then go to R&D. And finally, you can go to R&D, where you can use your designs from design to purchase the cars that have been pushed out from assembly, or to upgrade designs using car parts from logistics and designs from design. There's also administration, which is the 5th place that you can go. And administration is a good little place to go to as a sort of oh shit button, because if you go there, you can then take actions in any one of the other 4 departments, and you don't have to decide which department to do that in until the other players have taken their moves. So whatever they do as their actions may change what you want to do in administration and even where you want to go. So players are doing that. They're getting these designs, they're getting these cars, they're kind of accumulating them on their player boards. There's a lot of other things I'm not mentioning, kind of a little more fiddly rules that affect points. Just kind of giving you the basics. And then they'll also be training in these departments because they want to either train to the full amount for endgame scoring or at least train past a minimum amount so that they're not last in line, and when Sandra comes around, they're not penalized. Then there's two other things in the game. There'll be these end-of-week evaluations. So at the end of every week, after Sandra has kind of evaluated each department, she will then hand out some points for things like cars and upgraded designs that players have. And occasionally, as players take cars from the R&D department, they will trigger meetings. And how many cars are taken to trigger the meeting kind of depends on player count. But they'll trigger meetings. And meetings will be a combination of goals that have been placed out at the beginning of the round, so players know what they are, as well as cards that players will individually add from their hands. And then players will score points off of how many goals they've scored for these goal cards. So you kind of pick and choose. If you have one where you've done a lot of the thing, you're going to want to get there first and fully score that goal. If there's a goal for something that doesn't pertain to you, you're not going to care about that goal. But there's a really nice balance, I think, in the engine that you're building, the literal engine of your player board, as you're getting the cars and the designs and kind of making that work out. And then what you're doing in terms of fulfilling things that are going to count later in the game to get you points in these meetings, because you can get quite a significant amount of points in the meetings. And then there's other little things throughout the game that can score you points as well. Little things that you can do that can score you points. I like the game for several reasons, and I'm sure I'll break it down more specifically in the first impressions video, which will be hitting soon. But on a very general level, I really, really like the worker placement element of this game, and I like the way the different departments work together. And I also like the way Sandra is kind of evaluating these departments, moving down from top to bottom down the board. Yet the best way, I think, in general for players to move is to go from the bottom to the top. So if you're moving as a player in general, if you're trying to move kind of from the bottom to the top of the board, you're going to stop in design, you're going to pick up some designs, then you're going to go to logistics and you're going to pick up some car parts, and then you'll go to assembly and you'll use those car parts that you just got to push some cars off the line, and they'll go over to R&D. And then you can head over to R&D and you can use the designs that you got from design both to upgrade the designs, and you can also use them to purchase the cars you just pushed out. So in general, I think if you kind of follow that line of the order from the bottom to the top, you're going to have kind of a nice series of turns. Now, you can't always do that because you're going to have to be adjusting for other things, like what the other players are doing, what Sandra is doing. Occasionally, you're going to have to, really kind of change up your plans. But I like that as a starting point, sort of from bottom to top, and then adjusting based on everything else that's happening in the game. I also really like the meetings. I like that kind of whole element. And I like in a lot of Lacerda games, how thematic the game is. How little things that you do in the game completely make sense the more you think about it, and even kind of inform your understanding of the game. I think Lacerda designs his games so well, and how he conceives of the theme working through the mechanics. But then you've also got Ian O'Toole involved, who does such an amazing job of translating that into the graphic design and the art. And these two guys, when they're working together, they make some amazing games that are among my favorites. I think if you were to look at my top 10 list, it's got to be at least a third Vital Lacerda games. So I love his games, and for me, this is one of the best. Now, if you're saying to me, Brian, I've never really played Vital Lacerda games, where should I start? I'd probably say don't start with Kanban EV. I think the best place to start is probably the Gallerist or Venus. Those games are lighter. I think they're a little easier to understand. And because his style is very similar in a lot of the games that he designs, I think if you understand those games and then you come back to games like Kanban EV or Lisboa, you're going to go into those games kind of already half understanding how they play, because they'll play somewhat similar to the way that Venus and the Gallerist are designed. Now, Mercado de Lisboa was a simple game that was designed using some of the mechanics of Lisboa. I don't think Mercado de Lisboa is a very good game, so I wouldn't recommend that one, even though that is the lightest, along with Dragon Keepers, which is a very light game, card game, set collection game that he designed with his daughter. I think as you move up from those two games, you're going to hit Escape Plan, which is probably the next lightest of his games. And it's okay. I kind of like it, but it does some things that are very, very weird. Players can end up not getting to score points at all at the end of the game. And it's very different from his other games. So I wouldn't play Escape Plan thinking that that is like other Vital Lacerda games. It is sort of like Vital Lacerda doing his own board game adaptation of Grand Theft Auto. And it's a lot of fun. It's very thematic. It's cool. But the engine building in it isn't the same as his other games. It's a little more fly by the seat of your pants. There's a little more kind of bluffing and take that and reactionism, I think, in that game. So I don't think that's a great place to start. So again, I would recommend either the Gallerist or Venus, and then I think, Lisboa, On Mars, and Kanban EV are kind of his heaviest. So you may want to play around in the Vital Lacerda world before you jump up to these. I also really like CO2 Second Chance. That's probably at 4 for me. That's the only one that's not published by Eagle Gryphon, and it's also got this weird kind of element to it where you can either play it full co-op or semi-co-op, but not competitive. And when you're playing full co-op, everyone's just working together to trying to save the world. When you're playing semi-co-op, everyone still needs to work together to try to save the world until the last 20-25% of the game. And that game can kind of run off the rails if a player playing semi-co-op decides to do things that are in their own interest too much at the beginning of the game, because it'll make it impossible for players to build enough green power plants to combat the power plants that are running off of fossil fuels, and the game's just going to self-destruct before the end, and it'll end and no one will score any points. So that can be a little frustrating. So I love CO2 Second Chance, but there is that element in CO2 when you're playing the semi-co-op, you need to make sure that everyone is kind of on board playing it as if it were a full co-op until the very end of the game. So it's just this weird little caveat that it has. But that for me is kind of my pecking order of Vital Lacerda games. Kanban EV, 10 out of 10. You can't get much better than that. I think I like Lisboa a little bit better, but I mean, it's quibbles. This is a great game. Amazing Vital Lacerda game. If you like really heavy Euros, really crunchy games that are also very thematic, the highest recommendation for this game. It is amazing. It's also got a really good solo mode. You're playing against not only Sandra, who's going to be evaluating you, but you've got 2 AI characters in the game, one sort of named after Vital Lacerda and one named after David Turksey, who designed the solo mode. It plays really, really smoothly. It plays very, very well. I think the solo mode adapts the game for solo play very, very well. Like, yeah, you're dealing with these kind of 2 AI players, but it still really, really incorporates the feel of the game to me. Sometimes in a solo game, it feels like it's different than the main game. Like, they have to change around a lot of things to make it work mechanically. With Kanban EV, that's not the case. I mean, they do have to change around some mechanics, but it still feels like you're playing the same game and trying to do the same thing. And it's very compelling gameplay. Like, there's enough variability into this. I could play this all the time, never really get tired of it. It's just so pretty to look at, so well designed, such great mechanics, so much variability. That's why it's the game of the month for June. So I think we're at the end of this video. I think I've said everything that I need to say about these games. There will be a new Game of the Month video coming in a couple weeks, and I've already played a lot of great stuff. I have an idea already what's going to be in that video, and I'm very excited. There's some more really great games that I want to share with you guys. And then, somewhere in the first week or two of September, the August Game of the Month video will be publishing. So there's going to be another 2 of these coming in the next month or so. Please consider liking and subscribing. And wherever you are, whatever you're doing this week, happy gaming, and I hope you're finding ways to play some games as good as these ones. Take care. I'll see you soon.